What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be taking a look at this week's community gaming tournament. I'm going to break down the top 4 deck lists and the metagame as a whole, and we'll also talk about today's OTA, the buffs and the nerfs coming with that. But first, let's take a look at this first place deck list from Roy V. We've got Thena, we've got Hope Summers, and we've got a bunch of cards with move to continually trigger both of those cards. Also Kitty Pryde, which can trigger both of these and contribute to playing exactly 2 cards for Thena. So this deck is definitely a known quantity at this point. There are a lot of people that have been playing this, though we haven't seen it do well in tournaments recently. And now we finally see it get a first place finish just in time because 3 cards in this deck are getting nerfed. Thena, Cassandra Nova, and Nocturne all lost 1 point of power. And I will say, that's a pretty small nerf. Now, a card with 1 power, losing 1 power it's a 100% nerf, right? But obviously it's not going to have that big of an impact because most of these cards get their value from their abilities, and Thena and Cassandra get their power from their abilities as well. But the fact that this deck plays 3 cards that are all getting a nerf means that will add up, right? So definitely relevant that this deck is getting some nerfs, but I think it's still going to be quite strong. And in second place, this deck is also getting some nerfs because it plays Cassandra and also Sandman, also losing 1 power. But again, I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal. This deck really relies on the huge power output from Dr. Doom and Ultron, which are sometimes supplemented with additional power from Patriot, Blue Marvel, and Dazzler, and potentially Iron Lad, either cheating those abilities out or copying one of those aforementioned ongoing abilities. I still think that this deck is going to be really strong. Ultron is basically like a 624. Of course, you're not going to wind up making 8 power worth of drones. There'll typically be some other cards in those other locations, but if there aren't, it's a 624 or more with Patriot and Blue Marvel potentially impacting that. So that is just really, it's really just Ultron being super powerful here, and then Sandman relies on the fact that you are playing Dr. Doom and Ultron and your opponent is not. You can also get around the Sandman restriction with Jeff, allowing you to drop Jeff plus Iron Lad, for instance, on the final turn of the game. And the deck also plays Cassandra Nova. We're going to see that in 3 of the 4 decks that we're looking at in this video. But this deck not only plays Cassandra Nova, but also plays Absorbing Man. Absorbing Man is mostly in here to copy Brood, which has historically been a really powerful combo. But Cassandra Nova is also a really powerful 3-cost on reveal ability. So copying that with Absorbing Man in specific matchups is obviously quite strong. So this deck, like the first place deck, I do think is going to keep kicking and will still be strong after today's OTA. In third place, we've got a deck that came in totally out of left field from Iron Fist here, moving it 1 location to the left. I guess it came out of right field here then. But this is Move from Wrong. I'm probably saying that wrong, but this is definitely not a deck list that I expected to cover today. Move is not something that we ever see at the top of these Marvel Snap tournaments, but Hawkeye Kate Bishop with I think it's called the Grapple Arrow, now gives a new tool to these move decks and potentially allows them to go over the top in ways that they haven't been able to before. So now you have Hawkeye Kate Bishop, Ghost Spider, Iron Fist, Doctor Strange, Hercules, and Heimdall all being able to move your Human Torch, Vulture, Dagger, and potentially Nocturne for some silly interactions. But one thing that I think is also really interesting to look at here. Uatu, the Watcher. I did not expect this card to make an impact in Tournament Marvel Snap, but here it is paired alongside Quake and Nocturne so that you can have some key control over locations in the game. And I think that's because move decks are decks that can very easily just be totally, and apologies or you're welcome if you can hear Lily snoring in the background of this video, by the way, but that's her if you can hear her over the backing track. But this is so move decks. I'll be honest, I have not played much move. This might make me give it a shot. I think I'm actually going to have a YouTube short about Doctor Strange tomorrow featuring Dagger, just because I had a Alliance mission or Alliance bounty, whatever those are called, to win 2 games with Doctor Strange. And other than that, have not really played too much with move. But I think this, while I'm on that subject, feel free to join the Never Lucky Gang if you are looking for an alliance and want to chat Marvel Snap with me in client there. But I think that move decks can potentially get punished or really rewarded by some key locations. So just having the information on those and then the ability to potentially control those further with Nocturne and Quake is really interesting in a way that I am kind of surprised. I imagine that the deck is not really planning on playing Uatu, and just because like you don't want to get your locations clogged up and then like you can't use your other cards, but either way, really interesting. Dagger is really strong now, by the way, now that it gets +3 power and you can trigger it off of unrevealed cards as well. So this deck I think is often in a position where it does not have priority, which means, well, I guess that doesn't really mean too much, but I don't know. It's tricky for me because this is a really weird and unique deck that has not seen much play, but I just have to imagine that the Uatu and the Quake are doing a lot of work here. And I don't mean to say that the rest of the deck is like bad, but the fact that I have not seen this deck perform well previously, and now here it comes with Uatu and Quake, I just feel like these are probably important cards to making the archetype work overall. So that's really all I have on move for now, but Kate Bishop adding the grapple arrow could potentially, last week we saw Kate Bishop allowing Junk to perform at the highest level. And now we're seeing Kate Bishop move up the charts here. So really cool. I do believe we are going to see one more Kate Bishop list right here in 4th place from Scarface. And this is the Moon Knight deck that I featured last week as well, which only plays odd cost cards in addition to Proxima Midnight, but has now added Hawkeye Kate Bishop. So one thing that is interesting about playing a deck full of odd cost cards, the soonest you're ever going to play Moon Knight is turn 3, which means you can actually afford to play some 2-cost cards. And I do wonder if we'll see some further innovation on this archetype, with Scarface choosing to play Hawkeye Kate Bishop, certainly one of the most powerful 2-cost cards currently in Marvel Snap. But I think that there's others for sure, and I think that we could see those make their way into this deck list in the future. From there, we've got the Darkhawk combo, we've got the Black Bolt package as well, and a little bit of disruption in the form of Spider-Ham and Copycat and Nocturne. So I think that this deck is still definitely a real quantity here. And I think there's still a little bit of room for innovation. I did bring this up in a YouTube short as well, but for those that didn't see, if you don't have Proxima Midnight, which if you've been following my recommendations up until this point, you probably don't have Proxima Midnight because it has not really been a great card. It has been specifically played in discard decks before this change to Moon Knight allows it to be a combo with that card. But there's another card that you can combo with Moon Knight, Swarm. If you don't have Proxima Midnight, it's not as good for a few reasons. You can't play Moon Knight to discard Midnight on the final turn of the game, or I'm sorry, to discard Swarm. You can't do that on the final turn of the game, but there are some upsides. One other thing that I did after I threw in Swarm is I also put in Blade as a way to discard those swarms again and get even more value, plus then you're playing a 1/3, which seemed worth trying out. And yeah, then you can make an additional swarm if you follow up the Moon Knight by playing the Blade. So all of that, I think, was cool as well, and I'm really curious to see future innovations on this archetype, but Hawkeye makes a lot of sense as just a really powerful 2-cost card, which also adds odd cost arrows to your hand. That's super important, so you can still follow up Hawkeye with the turn 3 Moon Knight, and you won't have to worry about discarding those arrows. So all of that, I think, is quite cool. And let's also take a look at the metagame as a whole here. And I will also have a link to this sheet in the video description if you want to do some further deep diving on your own. And sorry, this was supposed to be hidden because I did not actually look up that data. So I don't know how all of these things got back into here, but let me hide this, and this should all be relevant. Oh, I see what I did. That was last week's sheet. So here we have this week's, and we can look at the top 8 deck lists as well. I sorted into the top 8. And then everything below this, I did not sort, didn't feel like looking at the top 16 for this video. We can see a Thor deck with Jane Foster, Beta Ray, and Thor. We have a sort of junk deck, but also with Dagger. So that is interesting. Yeah, just Dagger, Iron Fist, and I've seen some other people play around with this as well in the past. So this is interesting. This is basically just saying, okay, if Kate gives me a grapple arrow, I'll use it and I'll have the dagger so that I'm able to use it. And if not, like, I'm also really still hoping for Acid Arrow. Basically, I want to have synergies no matter what arrow Kate Bishop gives me. So that is kind of a cool list. Who came up with this one? This is Andre Var, so shout out to them. Then we have another Moon Knight deck. This time, not exactly the same list as last week, but pretty close. Looks like dropping the, with Swarm. Oh, cool. So Swarm instead of Proxima. No Blade, though, and no Spider-Ham Rogue in this version of the deck. Rogue, also a really powerful card. Tech for the mirror here as well. We do see one RSM list squeeze into 5th place, and this one playing Mobius. Otherwise, Claw is kind of a cool card. Claw is just like secretly pretty good. It's a 5/12 and potentially a little bit underplayed, and maybe allows you some play against like Sandman, for instance, because it's a card that can impact multiple locations. So those are the other decks that round out the top 8, and then here is the data set that rounds out the rest of the tournament. Cassandra Nova, by far the most played card with 62% of the metagame, and that's 8/5 of the metagame, and we can see, or 5/8 rather, and 5 of the players in the top 8 also were playing Cassandra Nova, 3 in the top 4, so this number just kept improving. That's a shift of nothing though, which is pretty good for 62% play rate to begin with, where we see like all other cards 25% or higher have a pretty significant drop off. And then once we get into the 20%, we see some cards rise here a little bit. I can't remember how many players played Darkhawk specifically last week, but we know there was only one player playing Moon Knight, and now we have 6 players playing Moon Knight, with 2 of them managing to top 8. So this deck's still potentially underrepresented for how good it's doing. One of the biggest climbers, potentially the biggest performer in the tournament, was Kate Bishop. Only 6 players playing it. 3 of them managed to top 8, 2 of them managed to top 4. So Kate Bishop potentially still underrated, as people still maybe try to figure out exactly what is going on with her. And I can already tell you, Wiccan had 0 players in the top 8, of course. 5 players tried it, though. I think this is another one that players need a little bit more time with to figure out. Remember, this tournament is played on Tuesday, on the day that new cards drop. So if players were still trying to figure out Wiccan, that is understandable. What are some other interesting numbers here, and what else can we talk about? So I don't think I talked about this yet in this video, but RSM was nerfed. It used to generate 12 bonus cards for your deck. Now it gives you 15 bonus cards, which means that there's kind of an asterisk on Cassandra Nova getting a nerf here. Is this a nerf? Is this a buff for Cassandra Nova? Because in games where Cassandra is playing against RSM, she's actually going to be bigger than she was before this OTA. Unless, of course, your opponent has Loki'd, and then Cassandra is going to, again, be a little bit smaller because she's losing that power. But the fact that RSM is getting 3 more cards does mean it's kind of interesting, because it might mean that less people play RSM, which that would actually then become a nerf to Cassandra. So kind of funny how all of that works out, but RSM is going to definitely be worse from this change. Don't get it twisted. The deck that I showcased last week, my on reveal RSM deck, I don't think you want to play anything like that anymore. Unfortunately, RSM was probably too good. Is it still going to be good? Yes. Is it still going to be fun? Of course. So I'm fine with this change, and honestly, I'm kind of excited to play more RSM and just get a bunch of random cards handed to me and just make do with whatever we get here. I think that that's still going to be exciting. Thena had, a pretty good performance. Dr. Doom, of course, had a good performance. What are some other interesting things? Wasp. Wasp with a good performance here. And yeah, Sandman getting a little bit of nerf. Oh, here we go. Yeah, Iron Fist and Dagger so only 2 players played each of these cards in the tournament. We saw both of those lists that had made the top 8. So maybe this is just a little bit of a combo you could sneak in to your Kate Bishop Hawkeye decks. Previously in the past, we have seen Iron Fist plus Human Torch paired with, now this is a long time ago, we've got a lot more cards since then, but Iron Fist plus Human Torch used to go in some Falcon decks. You would play your Iron Fist, knock it over with Human Torch, and then Falcon and bounce those and redo it again. That used to be what bounce decks are doing. Bounce decks have a lot more powerful things that they can do now, but the fact that your best new card in your bounce decks gives you a sort of Iron Fist, maybe you should just be playing into it a little bit, so that way you have the opportunity to make use of those synergies. So definitely something interesting to keep an eye on. Here are some other cards that round out. Yeah, this was in the Titania deck, I imagine. And that's basically it. Angel, That one I'm really not sure about. Thanos, I do think the Mind Stone costing one less is a huge deal, but Thanos still starting in your opening slot is really awkward, and it can still get like spider-hammed. People are starting to play that card again, so that's really awkward for Thanos. Maybe you just want to throw Mobius in there, but I don't know. If I'm going to play a big deck and get punished by Cassandra Nova and Darkhawk, I'm going to play RSM, not Thanos. The risk there, while everyone is trying to punish RSM, I just think is not worth it. Angel gets maybe a buff, maybe a nerf. We are not sure yet. Doesn't seem like that's going to be a big deal. And then Man-Thing, I actually forget what this buff or nerf was, but I think it might just be +1 power. Maybe. I mean, they're kind of just like reminding everyone, hey, don't forget, like, this card is pretty good against Ultron. This card is pretty good against Patriot. Maybe try playing it. One card that I think is really interesting here, they also gave an additional power to Lady Deathstrike. Lady Deathstrike was very, very briefly seeing a bunch of play, and then they printed Cersei, and Lady Deathstrike really hasn't had that much utility since. I was enjoying Lady Deathstrike while I was playing it. It was a cool way to destroy Mobius, and it could be a cool way to destroy some of the stuff out of Ultron. Specifically, it can kill Patriot, so that's good. I'm not sure about Lady Deathstrike. It's hard because all of the changes in this OTA, other than Mind Stone and Angel is just a weird one. I don't think that's going to make a difference. Mind Stone, I do think will be significantly better, but all of the other changes, I guess there was the RSM change as well. Aside from RSM and Thanos, all of the other changes are just +1 or -1 power. The numbers, the margins are pretty slim in Marvel Snap, so we'll see how big of an impact that actually winds up having. But for now, I think that most of the metagame is going to stay pretty consistent with this Athena deck still being pretty good, but we'll see. For today, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.